Good afternoon and welcome you all. And our friends from media, it's our really we value your time and interest to be here amidst so much of hectic spring schedule meetings. And we have the privilege of Honorable Finance Minister of India, Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman, and we have Central Bank Governor Sri Shaktikanta Das, Secretary Department of Economic Affairs Sri Ajay Seth, and Dr. Ananta Nageshwaran, Chief Economic Advisor, with us. So we have about 30 minutes press conference, and we request you to be brief and to the point so that maximum number of questions can be answered within this limited period. So before we begin the questions from the media friends, would like to request Honorable Finance Minister to make few remarks in the beginning. Ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You able to hear me? Yeah. Well, this is the second of the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors meeting under the Indian presidency. This is being held in the margins, on the margins of the 2023 spring meetings of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank Group. Governor Das, the governor of the Indian Central Bank, Reserve Bank of India, co-chaired it with me. And the meeting saw participation of around 350 delegates with 13 invitee countries and various international and regional organizations. We had spread the meetings into 3 different sessions. The global economy was one, international financial architecture, and then sustainable finance, financial sector, financial inclusion, and then international taxation as a separate session. So the discussions were very intense in the sense there were a lot of substantive inputs coming from the members. We were very happy to see that many of India's, or in fact most of India's proposals have been well supported, and there's been an active engagement. At this stage, instead of going into each of the themes, I would just put it at this, and several side events have also happened in the context of the G20 related issues. Particularly the one which I'd like to remark here is the one which was hosted by the World Bank, IMF, and the India presidency, is the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable, which had a lot of discussions going into detail. A press statement was released following the meeting even then, that was on the 12th of April. And today, you'll also get a press briefing which will get into details. At this stage, probably I would reserve here and stop at this, because I'm sure the questions will take me into the details of each of the session and also anything related to the discussions. So instead of getting into great detail now itself, I'll leave it there, and if Ravi is all right, we can go for.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. And you're all aware, in fact, in our portal, you were requested to confirm our RSVP and also submit any questions you have. So thank you so much. We have got a large number of questions, and we would like to, as indicated on the portal, we would like to give priority to those friends who have given the questions. So to begin with, I would like to call the name of Hugo Dixon, Reuters.
Yes.
Yeah.
There I am.
Yeah.
Yes. The Finance Minister. I had a question about the next steps on international financial architecture reform, which is one of the themes of your G20 presidency. We saw Janet Yellen earlier in the week saying that what has been achieved with the World Bank Capital Adequacy Framework is the down payment, was the word that she used. And my question for you, because obviously you've got quite an important agenda coming up, not only the G20, but the Paris summit is what are the practical next steps do you think that can be taken to build on this first step? Because I think almost everybody acknowledges that although it's important, it doesn't yet match the scale of what the world needs. And what, in practice, do you think can be the next steps?
Thank you. Yes, that is a very important area. In fact, there's been a lot of discussion getting into details of how exactly the global financial architecture should be strengthened and what are the next steps and so on. So through the India presidency, I think we will be having several sessions to get into the details of how we want to look at the financial architecture itself. If I may add here, the expert group, which is also there looking at MDB reforms, is also actively progressing in this direction. They've had one meeting after the terms of references were agreed by the G20 members. They are now here also sitting together, talking with different members to get their inputs. At this stage, I will not be able to put my fingers on what next steps. I would think that is arrived at after the discussions are over and we come up with an agreed formulation on how to go about it. If Ajay would want to add anything more on it, Ajay Seth, on the international financial architecture.
Thank you very much. This is a process wherein World Bank has made a definite progress and other MDBs also looking into this. On one side is the traditional development agenda, which is, say, Sustainable Development Goals, another 7 years to go to reach those goals. There is unfinished poverty agenda, certainly in large number of LICs. At the same time, there are new challenges, which are 21st century challenges around the climate action issues are there. All that needs to be taken forward. So it's a good first step which has been made. Thereafter, that there was an active discussion which is happening around the capital adequacy framework in all MDBs. The ministers had endorsed it last year, and a roadmap is being evolved. Almost all, and I will say not almost all MDBs are working towards that how to implement the CAF implementation in letter and spirit. Thereafter comes in that how do we resource it, where does the private sector comes in, where does the blended finance comes in. So these are the building blocks on which the discussion is going on. And certainly, as Finance Minister said, that MDB expert group, which is the two co-conveners, Professor Summers and Mr. N.K. Singh, we also look forward to their report, and ministers would be looking forward to that report in July meeting. Thank you.
One thing is for sure that the World Bank and in its context also, and the G20 and in its context, the expert group which is working, together once the members have gone through it and agreed upon, will form firmly the template on which the rest of the multilateral development finance institutions can look to reshape themselves. So there is a good intensive parallel work going on, not conflicting but parallel work going on between the expert group and also the evolution roadmap which the World Bank's own governors have submitted.
Thank you, ma'am. And next question would be by Prashant Jha, Hindustan Times.
Thank you, ma'am. Just to follow up on the MDB question, and then I'll have another one. There seem to be hard trade-offs that will eventually come up in terms of development finance and climate finance. There isn't enough money for both. Where does the presidency as well as the grouping stand on this, and how do you conceptually, I know there are you laid out the process, how do you conceptually think of this tension? The second question, ma'am, is on the debt restructuring process, particularly China's role, which has been seen as impeding these efforts, including in low-income countries which are suffering from debt distress. What did the roundtable come up with on this? Thank you.
First of all, on this issue of trade-off, you took the developmental expenditures and also the funding of the developmental activities and contrasted it with saying climate finance, will there be a trade-off? Actually speaking, we have from our presidency very clearly highlighted that it's it's going to be an issue of how best to balance not just these two. If you look at it, development, funding of developmental activities, which is so much required for many of the low-income countries, but also to middle-income countries. In fact, I was very fascinated to hear a matter of fact being said, but it was fascinating to hear it in the forum, that even among middle-income countries, there are pockets of underdeveloped areas who desperately need funds for development. So it is not just development funding for low-income countries, now particularly post the pandemic. Development requirements are becoming a lot more focused on area specific and also those communities which have been very badly affected because of the pandemic itself. So the balancing, if anything, and that is what we are also highlighting, is looking at the core two things for the World Bank, which is poverty, extreme poverty alleviation, and the other one, bringing prosperity post the poverty alleviation, in the sense not sequentially but equally. The sustainable and other goals related to climate finance and so on, energy transition and so on, will now have to be the third pillar, if you'd like it like that. So India presidency has highlighted the fact that whilst being consistent with the goals of the World Bank, and just not balancing on them, we need to also bring in this element, which is now in 3 or 4 different headings: climate action, and then looking at sustainable goals and so on. We are saying it should now become equally important part of the core activities, and therefore it's not a balancing. It has to be proportionately for all the 3, looking at private and out-of-the-box thinking on funding, how to leverage your existing balance sheet so that you can expand it as much as you can and raise more resources. So there's a lot of intense work going on, and I'm glad to say there's broad-based unanimity. There's no contradiction or contradictory voices emerging on this. On the debt restructuring, the global sovereign debt roundtable, which was held by the IMF, World Bank, and India being the presidency of G20, who also co-hosted it, there's been absolutely positive discussion going on. There was one held much before we met up in Bengaluru. All stakeholders in the debt-related, distress-related matters were there. Private participants were also there. Affected countries which have been waiting for 1 or 2 years, and some others who are getting now relief, were also present. So this discussion seems to have gone in a very positive note. And you mentioned specifically China, but I thought in the meeting all were positively engaged.
Thank you, ma'am. And next question, I invite Shota Mizuno from Yomiuri Shimbun from Japan. Yeah.
Thank you for this time. I'm Shota Mizuno from Yomiuri newspaper. Nice to meet you. I have 2 questions. One, the first is about the financial development in these last 2 months. So, which started from the bankruptcy of SVB in the United States. So. So what discussion did you have about this issue, and also did you talk about anything? Did you talk anything about crypto asset, digital asset? I heard that India is trying to make a new policy about digital issues. So, and actually Japan, we started regulation earlier than the other countries. So what maybe Japan could share our experience with you, maybe. So please tell us about those issues. What do you discuss about this issue? So second. So
you had 2 questions.
Excuse me.
Please.
That was the first one, please. And the second one is about Japan's relation so India's relation with Japan. So as you know, Japan is now this year G7 presidency. And yesterday Japanese government, G7 countries announced a new agenda about supply chain. So what relation do you want to have with Japan this year about the presidency? Please, so those are two questions from me. Thank you very much.
Well, because you spoke about the relationship with Japan, and also because it's G7 presidency with Japan and India being the G20 presidency, I'll address that first. We are certainly looking forward to having greater interaction with the Japanese government, and because in its capacity as G7 president, we are exploring all the possible areas of cooperation and areas of mutual interest, so that we are able to stand together and serve the global requirements as time demands. And those issues on which we have engagements and continue to have this engagement are the food security, development finance, climate and energy, environment also, digitalization, and disaster risk reduction and health. So these are topics on which we are specifically engaging with the G7 presidency so that we can take it forward. In fact, today I have a meeting with the Japanese finance minister, Suzuki Shunichi. So in that meeting, I hope to have a greater understanding of what Japan expects through the G7 presidency to achieve, and where India can work together. Being the Indian presidency for G20, we can work together with Japan and achieve a greater coordination and synergy between the two groups. Japan has also invited India for a dialogue with the partners at the G7 finance ministers and central bank governors meeting, which is going to happen on 12th May. And as things stand, I propose to go attend that meeting and actively engage with the G7 finance ministers.
Thank you, ma'am. And
on the digital asset, I'm glad to say that is a proposal which we had come up for discussion among the members. And India's idea of getting, there are of course papers on our request being prepared. One has already been tabled in the G20. IMF has prepared a paper. So has FSB come up with their own paper. A synthesis paper will also be submitted sometime September or October. The idea, I think, I am glad to say, there is a greater acceptance among all G20 members that any action on crypto assets will have to be global. And therefore, that's, I think, one of the biggest advantage that the G20 and its members agree that it's not going to be possible to have an independent, standalone country dealing with the crypto assets, and that it has to have a globally coordinated some kind of a understanding on how to go about regulating crypto assets. The way in which we are seeing this pan out during our presidency is that IMF's paper is being discussed. FSB's paper also will be taken up. Synthesis paper will be prepared between the IMF paper and the FSB's paper, both put together. Also a discussion will happen in September, October. End of the day, we see a roadmap being readied on how and what kind of understanding the members of G20 have in this, and it can be taken further forward on specific actions of regulation as and when the G20 takes a call on it. I don't want to preempt the decision, obviously I cannot, the decision which the Council will take, but good work by FSB, good work by IMF, also indicating the direction of just not crypto assets being somewhat in the terrain of yet to be regulated, but the consciousness that crypto assets particularly those which are outside of the central bank, being not backed by any sovereign asset, can themselves cause macroeconomic instability. So today we are at a position to see how countries are now recognizing that it is not just a crypto asset regulatory issue where countries will have to come together, but the IMF dealing with it has also brought in this dimension that there can be issues of macroeconomic stability itself. And today I'm very glad to have heard the European Central Bank chief, Christine Lagarde, speak about specific example of how money have been routed into this operation, resulting in too many such companies who are getting involved in it, raising questions of where the trail is. So it was very substantive discussion, and the agreement that all of them had was that, yes, it has got to be globally handled. So that's where we are.
Thank you. Lalit Jha, PTI. So I request you to be brief in questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Lalit Jha from PTI. Just wanted to ask you the broader takeaways from the FM's meetings with G20 and the EU, and to what extent do you think the war in Ukraine is posing a challenge in arriving a consensus or arriving key issues that is impacting the global?
In what ways?
In what ways it is posing a challenge in arriving a consensus?
Which is?
Which
is posing? Ukraine, is
Ukraine
it?
War in
Okay.
Ukraine, right. And follow up on the crypto thing, the speed at which the crypto and Bitcoin technologies are moving at, don't you think that the speed at which the G20 is moving on creating the regulations is a bit slow?
A brief comment on the second. Technology always has inherent capacity to move very fast, and too fast, sometimes too much faster than what you can catch up with. But G20, I think, has responded fairly with alacrity, and that is why today you're able to move with 2 or 3 substantive papers. They're not off-the-cuff papers, they are papers based on good research. FSB had already started working, and we are able to now get them on board to do this, lay the paper for everybody's discussion. IMF has looked at from the point of view of global macroeconomic issues, stability issues, and so on. So, technology will move fast. There's just no doubt. And even if you caught up with it today, there's no guarantee that you'll be on the top of it tomorrow. We'll have to continuously keep ourselves nimble and agile. So that I don't see as a negative to start with, but I'm glad that the progress is being made. On this issue of takeaways, this is not the final. As I stand today, the issues which are being discussed with a momentum being gained between February and now itself tells me that these can be possible takeaways. I'm not concluding that these are the final takeaways. The first one is about the debt vulnerabilities. I'm glad that it is moving fairly fast. The governors recognized, and the ministers and the governors recognized, the urgency to address debt vulnerability, including strengthening multilateral coordination towards addressing the increasing debt distress in the low-income and middle-income countries. And also, the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable, which was held on April 12th, I think has brought in a certain avenue for people to talk about how we all will have to work towards addressing the issues of distress in so many countries. And a current global debt landscape is emerging, which is what I think is the first takeaway that I will put before you. As I said, these are not finally fixed, and this is not the end of the story. As things evolve, we'll get to talking about takeaways subsequently. So that's the first one. Second is, as I said earlier, this agenda which India's presidency brought about on reforming Multilateral Development Bank has been very well appreciated. So this acceptance of an expert group where we have 2 co-conveners, Lawrence Summers and Shri N.K. Singh from India. So Strengthening multilateral development banks issue has received a lot of warmth. This expert group is going about its work. And hopefully, by July, we should have something on the table for the members to discuss about it. The third is the climate finance and sustainable financing of climate and climate-related matters. I had already spoken a bit about it. Bringing in private finance and ensuring sustainable development goals are also met up. So this discussion on climate finance is also moving in a very positive direction. Not just the current flow, but also the quantum that is required for meeting with current climate challenges, and also looking at transitional costs, the technology that is so required. So that is the third, I would say. The fourth is the Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion, where digital public infrastructure has found a lot of traction. We've had discussions in Bengaluru. We are having discussions here as well. Leveraging DPI, that is the digital public infrastructure, for achieving global financial inclusion is a subject which every country has taken keen interest in, and people are looking at how best they can catch up with the bringing inclusion through the use of technology. I was very grateful to Singapore for having recollected the fact that we are now in an agreement with them for the cross-border payments, and how things are shaping up because of technology. And this has actually got the interest of a lot of people. And when we are talking about crypto, also when we are talking about digital public infrastructure, the cross-border payments issues also therefore get subsumed in this discussion. Even there, if you want to have a standalone takeaway about cross-border transaction, even that is getting covered. So I'm just putting it into, say, my item number 4 for the takeaway, but cross-border per se has that strength of being one of the very important instruments which can find a good buy-in from all the countries. The fifth one I would put as of today, a possible takeaway is the international taxation issue, which was earlier discussed about, so that we achieve a fair, sustainable, and a modern international tax system. That was also discussed among members today. And the two-pillar international tax package, which was agreed upon in October 2021, swift implementation has been called for by all members. Therefore, the progress that we are making on this area is also to bring in greater transparency in international tax reforms. So that's my fifth takeaway. And the last is the sixth one, which is based on the crypto assets, taking into account all the risks. One aspect which I want to add on, I did say with IMF also coming up with a paper, the macroeconomic stability related matters in the crypto assets matter, and originally the crypto assets itself being not supported by any sovereign backing has its own limitation. The money trail, the linkage to any terror-related financing, drug-related financing have all been discussed. I took the name of Christine Lagarde, who did say a particular instance where she saw the trail going all over the place. More importantly, the discussion on crypto also highlighted the fact that it's not going to be confined to one part of the world. Its implications can affect the emerging market economies as well. So even as we are talking about crypto, the impact that it can have on developed economies and the impact it can have on emerging market developing economies have also been taken on board. So takeaways there.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Sorry? Well, in this meeting, I think we were very clear that we are not talking about a communique or a chair statement. If you want a chair statement, you can look at the February 2023 first meeting of the finance ministers and central bank governors.
Thank you so much. And we have come to end of this press conference.
Anything from the governor? I went about answering. But
Sir, would you like to add something, sir? Or,
Yes,
I mean,
please.
maybe.
You must ask him.
Anyone has a specific question addressed to Governor, Reserve Bank of India? No, that's not related to G20. So, yeah,
Can we have some others who have not asked a question?
I think somebody
yeah.
else I can reply
Someone
to
who
that
has
question.
not asked the question so far.
That lady there.
Lady. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
Samir Hussain with the BBC. I just want to ask about the sovereign debt roundtable. You said that the discussions were really positive, but what was some of the positive language that you were hearing from China specifically?
I thought it was going to be for governor. Well, the fact that we had around the table Sri Lanka, Zambia, Ghana, Chad had already been attended to, Ethiopia. So discussions were to ensure that the resolution for these countries should happen on time. All stakeholders in this matter should come around to discuss and talk so that, well, if I remember correct, Zambia, even at the table, did mention that they had applied almost a year and a half ago, and they are awaiting a resolution even now. So that point that it is a very time-consuming process, and even when the IMF says, it's all right, we're handling your affair, it does take time after that as well. We found that almost all of them, inclusive of creditors, public creditors, private, all of them said it has to be addressed at the earliest. So I think even the country that you've named, China, had all agreed that it has to be speedily dispensed with. That is a great step forward, because that is what, once you recognize that you have to do it in time and at the earliest, it moves faster. So I expect the resolution for many of these countries, I named a few, maybe there are a few others I didn't name, will have their resolutions done at the earliest.
Thank you, sir. Would you like to say something on CBDC, sir? I think.
No, I don't think there was any specific question, so I'm okay. Sorry.
No, you have something to ask? Yes,
Governor.
Governor.
Yeah.
I was just following up on the question about financial stability. Oh, sorry, Daniel Avis, Agence France Presse. I was just wondering, following up on the question about financial stability, whether the question of the banking concerns on both sides of the Atlantic over the last few weeks came up, and if you could share anything about those discussions. Thank you.
You see, at the global level, the recent developments in the banking system in the United States and in Switzerland have once again brought into focus the importance of financial stability and banking sector stability. As you would be aware, central banks all over the world are custodians of financial stability in their respective economies. The development, the failure of banks here in the United States and also in the Switzerland have naturally again renewed a lot of interest in that particular area. So far as India is concerned, the Indian banking system, the Indian financial system remains completely insulated from the developments which have taken place in the US or in Switzerland. Our banking system is resilient, stable, and healthy. All the parameters related to banking, whether it is capital adequacy or it is the percentage of stressed assets, or it is the liquidity coverage ratio of individual banks, both at individual level as well as at the systemic level, or issues like provision coverage ratio, aspects like net interest margin of banks, profitability of banks, whichever parameter you take into consideration, the Indian banking system continues to be very healthy. And so far as the Reserve Bank is concerned, over the last few years, we have significantly improved and tightened our regulation and supervision of the entire banking system, including the non-banking financial companies. Our focus of supervision is on early identification of any build-up of vulnerabilities. Do not wait for the crisis to build up, but find out, identify early signals, and then nudge the bank, ask the bank to take necessary action to mitigate any build-up of vulnerability in their working or in their finances. So overall, the Indian banking system remains resilient and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And the detailed press release is available you can download it from the website of Department of Economic Affairs, dea.gov.in. Thank you so much for your patience and the questions. Thank you.
Thank you.